Good evening, Western Standard viewers, and welcome to the HANNAFORD Show, a weekly politics show. Last week, Canadians were told by President-elect Donald Trump that along with Mexico, they would be facing a 25% tariff wall on their exports to the U.S. unless they got control of north-south trade in illegal drugs and illegal aliens trying to sneak into the U.S. from Canada. With me tonight to talk about that is Dr. Jack Mintz, one of Canada's foremost economists and original thinkers. Good evening, Jack.
Good evening, Nigel. Pleasure to be with you.
Great to have you. Jack, two questions to start. First, President Trump has a reputation for making outrageous demands as he launches into negotiations. It's no secret he's written a book about the art of the deal. So, is he serious? And the second question is this: although he's talking about illegal drugs and aliens, is that really the issue, or is the deal somewhere else? Well, what do you say, Jack?
Well, first of all, on is this kind of like typical Trump stuff what we saw in the first mandate, where he certainly threatened tariffs of all sorts of things, and of course, he opened up NAFTA, the negotiation over our free trade agreement with the United States and Mexico. And, some of it was bluster in the sense that he was trying to get certain deals made. He's a transactional person. But as we saw with NAFTA, the deal was opened up and there were some changes that were made, and that did happen. I think we're in a very different situation now for this mandate. I don't think it's exactly the same as before. First of all, I think there's very broad support in the United States for favoring domestic production. And I think also the Republicans are looking at tariffs, not just only to protect industries in the United States and draw investment back into the United States, but also as a source of revenue. And so Trump has said during the election that he wanted to put in a broad-based tariff on all countries. He talked about 10 or 20% at that time. And I think there's actually a very serious possibility that he may want to do that as a way of trying to not just achieve his trade goals, but also to get the kind of revenues he would need. And this isn't the only source, but it'll be one of the sources to help pay for the tax cuts and the need to balance the budget, or at least try to move to a smaller deficit in the United States. So if you're going to sort of make all the things come back together, I think we're in a very different situation right now. And of course, his threatening of 25% tariffs in the case of Canada and the United States, I think that is something where perhaps relief would be given if the right actions are going to be taken. And I think that is his goal.
Sorry, go finish up.
Well, I was going to answer your second question, which was, about the border and security up the border. The initial Canadian response was, "Oh, this is a much bigger issue for Mexico than it is for Canada. Like, why are we, being brought into this?" And you might argue that it's a bit unfair to put 25% on Canada, just like Mexico, given the millions that have been involved in illegal immigration coming into the United States, compared to what I've just read recently. The Americans have caught close to 200,000 trying to come into the United States. So from the northern border. But I think there are some issues that need to be dealt with, and we can get into more detail later on. But as it was reported today, out of the people that the Americans have caught at the southern and northern border as potential terror suspects, that 86% of them are coming from the northern border, and that is an issue I think that we're going to have to deal with.
Just as a comment on that, you've heard, no doubt, that Premier Smith here in Alberta has decided to deploy Alberta sheriffs in an attempt to at least start to cope with that situation. And I hear that some other provinces are doing the same thing. Is this something that a province can actually make a a big dent in?
No, I think they can maybe try and do some of it. I think, you have, for example, in Ontario, the Ontario Provincial Police, who have in Alberta the RCMP, and you may use the local police forces to try to maybe catch people who become illegal immigrants. But I'm not sure we can do very much about it because there's a legal process, and of course that's part of the problem. Just like the United States, once they identify themselves to be a refugee or something like that, then there's a process that's involved to look at the claim, and that could take quite a long time before it's dealt with, such as 2 years. And so I think that there is an issue. I think.
Well, this certainly makes it our problem, but if we succeed in reducing the number of people trying to crash the border to the U.S., then I have to assume that's going to work in our favor.
Well, I think there's two different there are two different types of issues involved. There are people that come through our border, including airports, etc., that come on the West Coast and East Coast, etc., not from just the United States. And this is what the concern is that what the Americans are arguing, they're terrorists, actually, or terrorist suspects, that it's easier to go through Canada than to go through Mexico to come into the United States. How true that is, I'm no expert. But going back to your question, what I was going to say was that in the end, the federal government has to enforce the border. They have the Canada border and border operations that is their purview. It's federal responsibility, and I don't think the provinces can do as much as what the federal government has to do.
Okay. So I think what you were saying just a moment ago is that it has now become acceptable to discard free trade, or at least acceptable in the United States, to discard free trade in favor of trade barriers that support other political objectives. We have a free trade deal with the U.S., the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, and applying a 25% tariff with that agreement in place would indeed seem to be discarding a free trade agreement. So, excuse me, people are saying he'll never do it, really, because it would hurt Americans to pay more for oil, gas, lumber, and motor cars sourced in Canada. Are we just kidding ourselves? Is that actually going to help us?
Well, I think there is an economic theory that I think is very important to first lay out. And that is who pays for a tax or like an excise tax on beer, or who pays a tariff in the case of when we're talking about trade. And the theory will tell you that some of the tariff will be shifted forward to consumers. Some of it will be shifted back to producers, including the retailers who might have to absorb some of the costs with lower profits. And that depends on, what the sense, how, the size of the markets and the sensitivity of demand and supply to changes in price. So to give you an example, in the case of oil, let's say United States puts a tariff on Canadian oil sold to the United States. Well, first of all, the American market gets heavy oil. There's different sources of heavy oil, including Mexico and Venezuela, which right now is not very important, but there's also some other sources internationally. And so the Americans could decide, well, we're going to put this tariff on Canadian oil, but we'll buy more oil from other sources, particularly heavy oil, which is needed for the refineries in the Gulf Coast. In that case, a significant part of the tariff is going to be borne by producers in Alberta with respect to the tax on oil. Now, if the United States can't get the same amount of heavy oil from other places, then some of that tariff is going to get shifted forward to American refineries that are going to have to pay more for their oil. And then, of course, that will raise gasoline prices in the United States. So probably some of that tariff is going to get shared between the two countries. And it's not all going to just fall on American producers. And that's why the discussion is somewhat been incorrect in talking about the impact of American tariffs. It depends on the sector, it depends on the industry, it depends on the options. But oil is a really good example. In case of Canada, except for the Trans Mountain pipeline now, we can't sell our oil anywhere else in the world. All of it is piped down to the United States. 90% of our oil is sold to the U.S. And so if you put a tax, if the Americans put on a tax, we have no options. We can't say, oh, we're going to take our oil and ship it somewhere else. We can with the TMX. We have maybe 900,000 barrels per day that we could kind of shift over to some other countries. But even then, you have to sign long-term contracts and all sorts of other things to do that. The main point is that we're really beholden to the U.S. when it comes to oil, but we're also really beholden to the U.S. with respect to the auto industry, which is also very integrated in North America. And again, 90% of our autos and auto parts are sold to the United States, of our exports. And you take these two industries, both oil, gas, refined petroleum, and the other one being the auto sector, which is both cars and parts. You add them together, that's 1/3 of all of our exports that we sell to the rest of the world. And those two industries are completely beholden to the United States in terms of our total trade, 90% of it. So we don't really have very many options. And so that means that you put a tariff on, there's a good chance that we're going to absorb some of that tariff. It's going to hurt us. It'll probably hurt the U.S. a bit too. But in the end, I think we're going to suffer more of it, given the size of the market in the U.S. and given the options that the U.S. has that we don't have.
Well, you think of softwood lumber, if they apply a tariff to that, I think we're their main source for, what the basic construction material of a house is. So that's going to have an upward pressure on home prices in the United States. I would have thought. Do we have any leverage there, perhaps?
Well, again, it depends on how much is can we divert to other countries. That's the point of this theory. It tells you that if you're even if U.S. is reliant on our wood, which again there's other wood coming from Norway and other countries that could be bought, but even if they are very much beholden on U.S. or Canadian lumber sales, the question is, do we have options to sell our lumber somewhere else? And in the case of lumber, we actually do sell to Asia, so we do have some options that are available to us. And so probably, I suspect, in the case of lumber, more of the tariff would fall on consumers in the United States. But there was a study done on the Chinese tariffs that the Americans put on. Trump had originally put on, and Biden continued them. Actually, people forget this is not just Trump. This is now something that's done on both sides of the aisle in the United States. Both Republicans and Democrats support these things. And the Chinese tariffs were found to be significantly shifted forward to the U.S., but surprisingly not so much through higher consumer prices, but impacting retailer margins in the United States, was kind of an interesting story in itself.
From what you're saying, Jack, it seems to me that diversification of Canadian trade should be the long-term goal of any government. And certainly I do well recall writing several speeches for Mr. Harper back in the day, in which we were applauding New Deals in Europe and in Asia and so forth. But this seems to have fallen by the wayside. With agreements, if we had agreements all over the globe, we wouldn't be in such a tight spot now. And if we had ramped up the infrastructure to export oil and LNG off the West Coast, do you think that Mr. Trudeau now regrets canceling and discouraging those projects?
Oh, I don't know if he regrets it. He's so concerned about climate change, even though natural gas sales, for example, internationally, if it leads to the reduction of coal consumption internationally, that actually could be a win in terms of climate change, not a loss.
Mhm.
That aside, I don't think he regrets it at all. I think that's because his main and only priority has always been climate change. Even now, he talks about how climate change is more important than putting food on your table. So I don't think he regrets it at all. But it is a good example. We talked about trying to beef up our transportation networks. There's been the Northern Corridor proposal, trying to have more opportunities to sell our goods and services internationally, and oil and natural gas is a good example. LNG, we had tremendous number of proposals made around 2010 to build LNG plants in BC, and only one went ahead, and it's now just coming onto production soon. And so we've talked the game when it came to oil and gas, but instead we didn't do anything after all that time, except for the TMX pipeline. That's been the only one that had any success. And at the same time, when you look at some of our other sectors, we still tend to be very focused on the U.S. and 75% of our total exports go to the United States. I just mentioned the auto and the oil and gas sector because they are our two biggest export earners, and 1/3 of our total export earnings, and yet they 90% of that is sold to the United States, which means that we do have a little more diversification in some of the other areas, which is good. But we haven't really done very much outside of some trade agreements. But again, we're still very much dependent on our trade with the United States, which perhaps is not surprising because that's the shortest distance for much of our production in Canada. You just have to hop over the border and send some things down into that very big U.S. market, which is now 25% of world GDP.
Changing the subject very slightly, Jack, we like to think we're a free trade country, but as I was buttering my toast this morning, I reach into the fridge and I pull out a fresh pound of butter, and it occurs to me that we get all het up when Trump makes these kinds of demands, but we still have supply management. So when it comes to free trade, how clean are our hands? Are we just talking the talk?
Well, I think, I think the article that I had this morning, I think was trying to make the point that for years, especially after the Second World War, we adopted a principle of free trade. In fact, the British did through the British Empire back, even earlier after the abolition of the Corn Laws in Great Britain in 1846. But the idea of free trade became very much an objective for governments in order to keep prices lower for consumers and also specialize in the industries that you're most able at and have the highest productivity and lowest unit cost to sell abroad. And so those were some of the things that we did that many countries pursued. And when you go to before 2008, if you look at the kind of advice that the World Bank gave, the International Monetary Fund, as well as other within many countries, the idea of opening up borders, allowing for import competition, all those things were good. They were viewed as very good things to do. Free trade was an objective. Didn't mean that we had a perfect free trade, and there were certainly areas that we did that, where we tried to protect industries, but still the principle was accepted. And I think today that's all gone now. That has changed in 20 years. No longer are countries free traders. So we can easily, and Canada is included there. We can blame Trump for doing what he's doing and criticize him, but on the other hand, we're not pure either. And supply management is a perfectly good example. Everybody will write, or any economist worth the salt will tell all the terrible things about supply management. First of all, it leads to higher butter prices, higher milk prices, because of the restrictions on imports coming into the country. It also leads to inefficient farms. the typical dairy farm in Canada's got 100 cows. I remember talking to somebody in Oklahoma once when I was there, and he was involved with dairy farming, and he told me they had 2,000 cows. The operations are so much larger in economies of scale, and they're exporting a lot. And we know that Australia and New Zealand got rid of their supply management. I had a great student this year at the School of Public Policy in University of Calgary, Ben Harford, who wrote an excellent capstone paper explaining the difference between Australia and the Canadian experience. Australia got rid of their supply management. They did it over time by putting a tax on milk that paid for the quotas to reimburse farmers for that. But what happened is that you not only are able to have more sales going abroad, but you also get a consolidation that lowers prices, for milk to the benefit of consumers, but also to the benefit of milk product industries like cheese and yogurt and others that could sell more abroad as well. But we don't sell anything abroad. No one buys Canadian cheese, per se, because raw milk is too expensive. And so it's too expensive to export. And certainly when I, go to the store and buy cheese today, it's just ridiculously priced now. I mean, a small block of cheese costing $14 when, 3-4 years ago it was like $6 or $7. And so I think we have, it's a really perfect example that we do protection too. And there's more industries and other examples of protection that we give to various industries from import competition. And so we can go on about, we might beat our chest that we're wonderful free traders, but we're not. We are not free traders. We like to protect our industries, and it's become a philosophy now that we have to protect industries because of what happened, after China came on after WTO accession, and it did hurt the heartland of many industrial countries. Although it did, all that trade that happened with Asia did lower consumer prices for people in North America and in Europe. But at the same time, it also reduced income inequality because Asian incomes went up quite a bit and international income inequality dropped, all after 2000. And of course, we benefited from that Chinese expansion and world expansion after 2000 with higher resource prices. And Canada was doing very well, especially before the financial crisis in 2008, where the Canadian economy was really booming as a result of that growth in world trade and the demand for resources. So we've now going the other way, and that's of course a concern that I have in terms of where we're moving.
So, Jack, we're almost out of time here. Should I ask you this, though? Here we are. I mean, Mr. Trump has presented his threats, demands. But, it seems to me that we should have better control over our borders anyway. So why not make a virtue out of necessity and just do a deal with Trump? Is that what we're looking at?
I think in the end, that's the best course of action. I mean, think about it. One option is we do nothing, we retaliate. Well, retaliation is not going to do anything for us. In fact, it's just going to hurt us too. I mean, it may hurt the Americans a bit, but it's not going to help us. In fact, I read one editorial today in one of the Canadian newspapers this morning, and they're saying we should retaliate, but that's not going to do anything. We'll end up hurting ourselves with retaliation as we're going to be probably hurting ourselves exporting into the U.S. market. So if you take that off the deal, that doing nothing except retaliating, then the other option is trying to make a deal. And the main point is that we shouldn't. I mean, the biggest mistake that the federal government started with is trying to say, "Oh, this is a Mexican problem. This has nothing to do with Canada." But that's wrong. There are things that we should be doing. We should be ensuring that our border is tighter and more secure. We should be worried about potential tariff threats coming through Canada into the United States. It's not, especially when we're responsible for most of them being apprehended in the United States. So I think we need to worry about that. And then in the case of fentanyl, we have increased amount of production within Canada of fentanyl. So again, we have a responsibility ourselves, not only to the United States, but also to ourselves in trying to reduce drug abuse and the horrible deaths that have occurred with fentanyl.
It just seems a shocking thing that a U.S. president has to dictate terms to a Canadian prime minister, and actually he's right. It'd be better for all of us if we just did what he's suggesting.
Yeah,
Jack,
exactly.
it's been great to talk to you again, and thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate that. I have a feeling we might be talking to you again quite soon if you're available. But meanwhile, thanks and have a great day in Toronto.
My pleasure, Nigel.
For the Western Standard, I'm Nigel Hannaford. Good night.